I saved an Apache beauty, and she let me leave Wild West story." Dust swirled across the wide-open plains as James guided his horse along a narrow trail. The wind whispered through the dry grasses, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and for a moment the world seemed calm. But James knew that in these parts, calm was often the quiet before trouble. He had spent months traveling alone, delivering supplies to small towns, helping settlers repair fences, and occasionally guiding travelers through dangerous stretches. Life on the plains was harsh, and yet it had a strange rhythm he had come to understand. Every creak of a saddle, every rustle in the brush, every distant call of a hawk was a part of the world's story, and he had learned to listen. James's eyes were trained to notice movement, and that afternoon, a faint, irregular sound reached him, a cry soft but urgent. It was different from the usual calls of birds or the wind rolling through the canyon. Something human. He halted his horse and listened, holding his breath. The cry came again, closer this time, and a chill ran down his spine. Alone, in a land so vast and wild, danger often lurked behind every hill, but instinct told him this was not ordinary trouble. Something was wrong, and he could not ignore it. He followed the sound cautiously, his boots crunching against the dry dirt. The trail led him to the edge of a small ravine. There, partially hidden by tall grasses and broken branches, he saw her, a young Apache woman, trapped beneath a fallen tree. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, and her breathing was shallow, each movement a struggle. James's heart pounded. He had seen many injuries in his time on the plains, but there was something different about this moment. This woman's eyes met his, wide and wary, filled with both fear and a glimmer of hope. It was a look that seemed to silently ask for help, but also to measure whether he could be trusted. James dismounted quickly, moving toward her with careful steps. "It's okay," he said softly, though he knew she might not understand his words. Still, the tone mattered, gentle, reassuring, calm. He examined the fallen tree and realized it would take effort to lift it. His muscles tensed as he dug under the trunk, finding leverage. The woman tried to move on her own, but the pain made her wince. James could see bruises forming on her arms and legs, and he knew time was critical. With a heave, the tree shifted just enough for her to wriggle free. She stumbled into his arms, breathing heavily. For a moment, they simply stood there, the two of them, connected by the urgency of survival and the sudden, unspoken trust that had formed between them. Despite the danger in the world around them, James felt a strange calm. He had rescued people before, but there was something different here. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, cautious but unafraid, or the way she silently communicated that she trusted him enough to let him guide her. She didn't speak English, he realized quickly, but words were not always necessary. A nod, a glance, a shift in posture, these small gestures were enough to convey understanding. He offered his hand, helping her to steady herself, and she accepted it, gripping his hand with a strength that surprised him. She was injured, yes, but there was a fire in her, a resilience that would not be broken so easily. James knew he couldn't leave her there. The plains were unforgiving, and night was approaching fast. Predators, both animal and human, were never far away, and the ravine was no place for someone so vulnerable. He guided her slowly along the edge, supporting her weight when she faltered. With each step, he noticed details about her that made her seem even more remarkable. The way she balanced herself despite her injury, the alertness in her eyes, the quiet determination in her movements. It was clear she had grown up in a harsh world and survived by being smart and resourceful. As they moved, James tried to communicate, pointing toward a distant ridge where he knew there was water and shelter. She looked in that direction, then back at him and gave a small nod. It was the first wordless agreement they had shared, and it felt like a bridge between two worlds, his, shaped by wandering and helping others, and hers, shaped by the life of her people, skilled in survival and deeply connected to the land. Though they spoke no common language, there was an understanding between them, silent but powerful, that they would rely on each other to survive the coming night. The journey was slow. Every step brought new challenges. Loose rocks threatened to trip them, the wind carried a sharp chill, and the sky overhead darkened with the promise of a storm. Yet in each difficulty, James noticed her courage. She never complained, never faltered in spirit, even when her body betrayed her. There was a grace in her movements, a quiet bravery that spoke louder than any words could. And James, in turn, found himself talking softly, explaining what he was doing, offering reassurance, even if she could not understand the words. The sound of his voice seemed to calm her, and it calmed him too. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the plains in shades of blue and shadow, James found a small clearing where they could rest. He made a fire, stacking dry wood carefully to keep it burning through the night. She sat across from him, close enough that he could see the tension in her muscles begin to ease. She watched him work with a quiet fascination, occasionally pointing to a spot on her arm or leg, signaling pain or discomfort, and James responded as best he could. Though he knew he could not fix everything immediately, the effort mattered, and she seemed to understand that. That night, under the wide expanse of stars, the two sat in silence. The crackling fire was the only sound, besides the distant calls of owls and the rustle of grass. James reflected on how quickly life could change, how a single moment could alter the path of one's journey. He had ridden into that ravine thinking he might find danger, perhaps even death, but instead, he had found someone who would forever mark his memory. The Apache woman, though injured and wary, had shown him a glimpse of her world, a world of resilience, bravery, and unspoken understanding. Sleep eventually claimed them, but James kept one eye open, ever watchful, protective. He felt an unusual sense of responsibility, not just for her safety, but for the bond that had formed in those few hours of crisis. He had saved her life, yes, but he had also begun to realize that this encounter was not just about rescue. It was about connection, about trust, about two people from vastly different worlds finding common ground in the harsh, unforgiving beauty of the Wild West. And so, as the first stars faded and the chill of night deepened, James and the Apache woman rested side by side. Neither spoke, but each understood that the day ahead would demand courage, resourcefulness, and the quiet strength that had already begun to bind them together. The plains held many dangers, but for the first time in his long journey, James felt a spark of hope that even in a world defined by struggle, unexpected bonds could change everything. The morning sun rose slowly over the rugged plains, spilling golden light across the landscape. James woke first, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the night spent on the cold ground. Beside him, the Apache woman stirred, her dark hair falling across her dirt-streaked face. She had slept in short bursts, her body restless, likely from the pain of her injuries and the lingering fear of the night before. James watched her carefully. He knew she was cautious by nature, a survivor who had faced hardship and danger her entire life. Despite her fragile appearance, he could see the strength in her posture, the way she moved with quiet purpose even in discomfort. After a moment, he gently tapped her shoulder. She opened her eyes and looked at him, startled at first, then relaxed when she realized it was him. He smiled softly and pointed to the rising sun. It was time to continue their journey. He offered his hand, and she took it with the same quiet strength she had shown the day before. Though neither spoke the same language, there was a rhythm to their communication, small gestures, nods and glances that conveyed trust, understanding, and agreement. James knew that moving too quickly could worsen her injuries, but staying in one place was not an option. The plains were wild and unpredictable. Coyotes roamed in the early hours, and bandits sometimes preyed on travelers. They had to find safety, and he knew a creek several miles ahead where she could rest properly and he could tend to her wounds more thoroughly. He lifted her gently onto his horse, supporting her as best he could. She steadied herself with quiet determination, never once complaining, though her winces told him the pain was sharp. The trail was rough. Loose stones and uneven ground made each step a challenge for both horse and rider. James moved slowly, carefully choosing the path that would cause her the least discomfort. Along the way, he noticed small details about her, the way her eyes scanned the horizon, alert to every movement, the slight twitch of her hand when she sensed danger. She had clearly learned from a life lived in constant vigilance. He respected that. Even injured and far from her home, she carried herself with dignity and courage. Hours passed as they traveled. The wind picked up, stirring dust into the air, and clouds gathered overhead, threatening rain. James kept a watchful eye on the skies. A storm in these parts could be dangerous, especially for someone already weakened. He adjusted his pace, guiding the horse toward patches of shelter beneath rocky outcrops whenever he could. Each time she shifted uncomfortably, he paused, allowing her to rest. She would sit quietly, breathing deeply, then press on with him without complaint. It was as though she had made a silent decision. She would endure whatever was necessary to survive this journey with him. Along the way, they encountered other dangers. At one point, a pack of coyotes emerged from the brush, their eyes gleaming in the early light. James tightened his grip on the reins and kept the horse between him and the animals. He raised his voice, shouting and waving his arms to scare them off, but the pack was persistent, circling closer. The Apache woman instinctively reached for a small knife strapped to her belt, her movements swift and practiced. Though weak from injury, she stood ready, a silent partner in defense. The coyotes, sensing the combined threat, hesitated before retreating into the tall grass. James exhaled, impressed by her instinctive bravery. Even in danger, she refused to be helpless, and that strength encouraged him to push forward without hesitation. As the sun climbed higher, the heat grew intense. James offered her water from a small flask he carried, and she drank cautiously, aware of her limitations. They rested briefly under the shade of a lone tree, and during those moments, James realized something remarkable. Despite her inability to speak English, she was teaching him about her world. She pointed to plants along the trail, signaling which ones were safe to touch or eat. She demonstrated with gestures how to avoid thorns or unstable rocks. He watched carefully, following her silent instructions. In these simple acts, a bond deepened, a shared knowledge born of trust and necessity. The terrain grew steeper as they neared the creek. Rocks jutted sharply from the earth, and the path narrowed to a precarious ledge above a shallow ravine. James held her tightly, guiding her steps with care. One misstep could result in serious injury, but she moved with a grace that surprised him. Despite the pain in her legs and arms, she adapted quickly, trusting him completely. It was in these moments that James felt the true weight of responsibility. This was no longer just a matter of helping someone in need. It was about survival, partnership, and understanding that one wrong move could cost a life. By mid-afternoon, they finally reached the creek. The sight of water running over smooth stones brought a wave of relief. James helped her dismount, then led her to a flat area near the bank where she could rest. He gathered clean water, washed her wounds as best he could, and applied bandages carefully. She watched him, her expression unreadable at first, but gradually softened into one of quiet appreciation. She made a small gesture, pressing her hand to her chest and bowing slightly, a silent thank you, but more than that, a gesture of trust. James nodded in return, understanding that this moment marked the beginning of something significant, a connection between two very different lives, forged under extraordinary circumstances. The afternoon passed slowly. James built a small fire to boil water and prepare some food. She sat nearby, observing, occasionally pointing to the firewood or stones, guiding him with her understanding of the land. Even in her weakened state, she demonstrated knowledge and skill that amazed him. He realized that she had survived on these plains long before he arrived, learning the ways of nature, the rhythm of animals, and the dangers of humans alike. Her experience and instincts complemented his own skills, and together they formed a partnership stronger than words could convey. As evening approached, the air grew cooler, and James could see the tension in her shoulders ease. She moved with more confidence, helping him arrange the fire and even gathering a few dry sticks herself. It was a small act, but it symbolized trust, cooperation, and the first steps toward a silent friendship. James felt a deep respect for her, not just for her bravery, but for her spirit, her intelligence, and her resilience. He had rescued her from immediate danger, but in truth, she had rescued him as well from loneliness, from the monotony of wandering alone, and from the assumption that survival was only about endurance. Night fell over the plains again, and the creek reflected the silver light of the moon. They sat together by the fire, sharing the warmth in silence. James knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, there was a moment of peace. He glanced at her, noticing the way she closed her eyes briefly, finally allowing herself to rest. Though he could not speak her language, he felt a connection deeper than words, a bond born of shared struggle, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that they had saved each other in ways neither had anticipated. As the stars appeared one by one, James realized that their journey was only beginning. The creek offered temporary safety, but beyond it lay unknown dangers, bandits, wild animals, and the ever-present unpredictability of the Wild West. Yet with her by his side, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just a journey of survival, it was a journey of companionship, learning, and trust. And though neither of them knew what lay ahead, they both understood one thing clearly. Together, they were stronger, braver, and more capable than they could ever be alone. James settled back against a rock, keeping watch as she rested. He thought about the road ahead, the miles yet to travel, and the challenges they would face together. The Apache woman, for her part, remained quiet but alert, her eyes scanning the horizon even as her body relaxed slightly. They did not need words to understand the importance of the bond forming between them. In the Wild West, where danger was constant and trust was rare, they had found something extraordinary, a partnership that could carry them through the uncertainties of the land and the trials of the journey ahead. And so, under the blanket of stars and the soft murmur of the creek, they rested. Neither spoke, yet both knew that the day's events had changed everything. Tomorrow, the journey would continue, a journey of survival, courage, and the unspoken promise of mutual support that had begun with a simple act of rescue. The next morning, the creek glistened under the soft light of dawn. Mist hovered above the water, curling around the rocks and reeds like delicate threads of silver. James woke first, as he always did, listening to the gentle rush of water and the distant cries of birds. Beside him, the Apache woman was already stirring. She had spent the night in uneasy sleep, her body still recovering from her injuries, yet her eyes were sharp and alert. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that James admired more with each passing day. After a brief moment of silent acknowledgement, a nod from him, a glance from her, James helped her to her feet. She stretched cautiously, wincing at the aches in her muscles, but she did not complain. Instead, she focused on the journey ahead. James knew that today would be important. They were still far from safety, and while the creek offered temporary refuge, the challenges of the wilderness awaited. The woman's determination was inspiring. Even weakened, she moved with a sense of purpose, carefully placing her steps, scanning their surroundings, and observing the landscape with the instincts of someone who had grown up intimately connected with nature. As they prepared to move, James noticed how attentive she was to his actions. Every time he adjusted the pack on his horse or checked the trail ahead, she watched closely, learning silently. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, seemed to take in every detail. The way he measured the distance between rocks, the subtle shifts in terrain, and even how he gauged the strength of the horse. Though they spoke no common language, James felt a deep sense of connection forming. In this shared journey, they were becoming partners, relying on each other in ways that words could not capture. The morning passed with slow, careful progress. James guided her along the narrow trails, sometimes supporting her as she stumbled over loose stones, other times letting her move ahead when the ground allowed. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and the sounds of the wilderness grew louder. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow flicking across the plains. Somewhere in the distance, the faint murmur of a river hinted at their next milestone. Along the way, the woman taught James without speaking a word. She pointed to plants that were safe to touch, mimicked gestures for how to find water, and even indicated which areas of the trail were more secure. James marveled at her knowledge and adaptability. She was clearly no stranger to the hardships of the wild, and even in her weakened state, she remained alert, resourceful, and unyielding. By midday, the terrain became more challenging. A series of rocky outcrops forced them to navigate narrow ledges and steep inclines. James supported her carefully, guiding her steps with hands that never faltered. At one point, a sudden gust of wind nearly unbalanced them, but she steadied herself with remarkable poise. He realized that her presence was more than just companionship. It was an education in survival, a lesson in patience, awareness, and strength. Each small movement, each decision on the trail reflected her intimate understanding of the land. And James, in turn, shared what he knew: how to read the clouds for signs of rain, how to interpret the tracks of animals, and how to move quietly without drawing attention. As they climbed higher, they reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley below. The view was breathtaking. Rolling plains stretched out as far as the eye could see, dotted with trees, rocky hills, and glimmering rivers. Yet the beauty of the landscape did not mask the dangers it held. Bandits were known to roam these valleys, and wild animals prowled the edges of the forests. James paused, scanning the area carefully, and the woman mirrored his caution, crouching slightly and signaling silently for him to move slowly. In that moment, their unspoken communication felt effortless, a language born of shared experience and instinct. It was clear that their bond had grown stronger, built not only on the trials of the journey, but also on the trust and respect they had developed for one another. The afternoon brought another challenge. They heard the distant sound of hooves and voices, a group of travelers, possibly friendly, possibly dangerous. James signaled for them to stay low, and the woman crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the approaching figures. Though she remained silent, her body language spoke volumes. She was cautious, yet ready to act if necessary. The travelers passed without incident, but the encounter reinforced the reality of the wilderness. Danger could appear at any moment, and one had to remain vigilant. James admired her composure and courage. Even after everything she had endured, she did not panic. Instead, she assessed the situation calmly and moved with confidence once the threat had passed. By late afternoon, they found a small clearing near another stream, a perfect spot to rest and gather strength for the next leg of the journey. James guided her to a flat area where she could sit comfortably while he checked her wounds. He cleaned the cuts and bruises from the previous day, applied new bandages, and made sure she drank enough water. She watched him carefully, occasionally pointing to a sore spot or wincing, but never losing her quiet dignity. The way she trusted him, relied on him, and yet remained strong and independent amazed him. It was a delicate balance. He was her protector, yet she was far from helpless. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange. James noticed how the woman's eyes softened whenever she looked at him. There was a depth to her gaze, a recognition that went beyond words. She had survived many hardships in her life, yet she had allowed him into her world, into her trust. And in return, James felt a profound sense of responsibility and connection. He realized that this journey was no longer just about moving from one place to another. It was about understanding, learning, and sharing strength with someone whose courage inspired him every day. That evening, as they made camp beside the stream, James built a fire while the woman gathered dry wood and stones to help contain it. She worked quietly, efficiently, her movements precise despite her lingering pain. James could see that even in her weakened state, she was resourceful and skilled, traits that had undoubtedly helped her survive before he found her. They shared a simple meal, eating quietly under the stars, each aware of the other's presence and the unspoken bond forming between them. Though they spoke no common language, every glance, every gesture, every shared task deepened their connection. Night fell, and the wilderness around them grew still, save for the soft gurgle of the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. James kept watch while she rested, observing her from a distance as she finally allowed herself to relax. He thought about the day's journey, the challenges they had faced together, and the lessons he had learned from her. She had taught him patience, observation, and respect for the land, and for life itself. In turn, he had provided safety, guidance, and care. Together, they had become more than two individuals surviving the Wild West. They had become partners, relying on one another in ways that words could not describe. As the stars filled the night sky, James reflected on the unspoken bond that had formed. In the harsh, untamed world of the plains, trust was rare, and friendship even rarer. Yet, here was a connection that went beyond language, beyond culture, and beyond fear. The Apache woman had trusted him with her life, and in doing so, had shown him a courage and wisdom that he would carry with him forever. He knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he felt that he was not alone. Together, they could face whatever the Wild West threw at them, relying on each other's strengths and instincts. James settled beside the fire, his thoughts drifting to the future. Though the Apache woman had not spoken a word, he understood her actions, her gestures, and her gaze. She was telling him in her own way that she would stay by his side, that their bond was stronger than circumstance, and that she recognized the value of what they had found together. And in return, he promised himself silently that he would protect her, guide her, and honor the trust she had placed in him. The night stretched on, quiet and calm, a temporary reprieve from the dangers of the plains. The Apache woman slept fitfully, her body recovering but her instincts still alert. James remained awake long after the fire had burned low, watching over her and the surrounding landscape. He thought about the miles yet to travel, the obstacles yet to overcome, and the growing connection that had begun with a single act of rescue. The journey was far from over, but he knew that together, they were stronger than any challenge they might face. And so, under the vast canopy of stars, with the creek whispering nearby, James and the Apache woman rested side by side. Neither spoke, yet both understood the significance of what had been forged between them. It was a silent partnership, built on trust, courage, and shared experience, a bond that would guide them through the dangers of the Wild West and leave an indelible mark on both their lives. The morning sun barely peeked over the distant hills when James awoke to the soft sound of movement beside him. The Apache woman had already risen, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods with alertness. She moved with quiet precision, testing the ground and listening to the slightest rustle of leaves. James admired her vigilance. Even after days of hardship and injury, she remained fully aware of every detail in the wilderness. There was no fear in her posture, only a careful, calculated readiness, a skill that had kept her alive long before he had found her. James rose, stretching his stiff muscles from the previous day's long journey. The creek beside their camp sparkled in the early light, and the air was crisp with the scent of pine and wet earth. He could tell she was anxious to continue moving, but he also knew that the path ahead was filled with danger. Bandits sometimes roamed these valleys, looking for travelers to rob or harm. Wild animals lurked in the underbrush, ready to strike. And the terrain itself could be treacherous. Hidden cliffs, loose stones, and sudden drops made every step a potential hazard. He gestured toward the path ahead, and she nodded, signaling that she was ready. Together, they prepared to leave their small haven, the creek offering only a temporary reprieve from the dangers beyond. As they moved through the tall grasses, the woman stayed close to James, never letting him out of sight. She had learned to trust him, yet instinct told her that leaving his side could mean danger. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, and James realized she was not merely cautious. She was anticipating threats before they arrived. They crossed narrow trails and rocky hills, moving slowly but steadily. Each step required concentration, each decision careful consideration. They had become a single unit, moving together as if their instincts were linked, understanding the subtle cues of danger and safety without a single spoken word. By midday, they had entered a denser part of the forest, where sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy above. Shadows twisted among the trees and the air was cooler and damp. It was here that the first real danger of the day presented itself. From a distance, James noticed the glint of metal weapons carried by a small group of men, moving quickly through the underbrush. Bandits. They had likely heard rumors of a stranger helping a native woman and were now determined to intercept them. James froze, signaling the woman to crouch. She immediately obeyed, lowering herself behind a fallen log. Her eyes met his, and he could see the determination there. She would not panic, and she would not allow herself to be taken easily. The men approached, unaware that their targets were hiding. James's mind raced. They were outnumbered, and fighting was dangerous, especially with the woman still injured. But retreat was not simple either. The terrain behind them was steeper, and the bandits would pursue relentlessly. He motioned for her to stay low and follow his lead. They moved carefully, weaving through the trees, keeping out of sight, and using every natural cover available. The woman's knowledge of the land became invaluable. She signaled small shortcuts through thick undergrowth and hidden paths around fallen trees. James followed her guidance, realizing that her instincts, even while weakened, were sharper than his own. The tension grew as they neared a small clearing. The bandits had split up, one moving to the left, the others to the right. James assessed the situation, knowing that one wrong move could result in capture or worse. Suddenly, one of the men spotted them. A shout rang out and the bandit raised his weapon. The woman acted instinctively. Though still recovering from her injuries, she dashed toward a nearby tree, using it as cover. James followed closely, and together they found a narrow path that led downhill toward a rocky ravine. The bandits pursued, shouting threats and firing shots that whizzed dangerously close. Every step was calculated, every movement could mean life or death. The chase was intense. Rocks tumbled under their feet, and James felt the strain of keeping pace with her despite her injuries. Yet she never faltered. She moved with a combination of grace and precision, leaping over obstacles and finding routes he would never have considered. At one point they reached a fast-moving stream. Without hesitation she leapt across, landing safely on the other side. James followed, splashing into the cold water but maintaining his balance. The bandits were slowed by the terrain, giving them a precious advantage. James realized that her presence was more than just companionship. It was protection, wisdom, and courage all rolled into one. Eventually, they reached a hidden alcove beneath a rocky overhang. They crouched together, catching their breath, listening as the bandits searched the area, their voices angry and frustrated. The woman's hand brushed against his arm in a silent gesture, a signal to remain calm and quiet. They waited, holding their positions until the sounds of the bandits faded into the distance. James marveled at her instinctive skill. Even in her vulnerable state, she had anticipated danger and acted decisively, saving them both from capture. It was clear to him that she was not just a survivor, she was a fighter, resilient and unyielding. After the immediate danger passed, they continued their journey with caution. The terrain became more rugged, and the woman's injuries caused her to slow, but she refused to be carried. Instead, she adapted her movements, leaning on James when necessary but pushing herself to walk as much as she could. James respected her determination. He had saved her from immediate harm, but she had saved him too, from the assumption that survival meant moving alone or that help could only come from one side. Together, they navigated the wilderness, each learning from the other's strengths. By late afternoon, they reached a small ridge overlooking a broad valley. The view was both beautiful and ominous. Rolling hills stretched into the distance, dotted with trees and rocks, with the faint glimmer of a distant river. James knew that somewhere in that valley lay her people, her home, and the next step in their journey. Yet, as they prepared to descend, he noticed her hesitation. She looked at him, then at the valley, then back at him again. It was clear she did not want to leave his side. She had allowed him to guide her, protect her, and care for her, and now she was signaling in her own way that separation was not an option. James understood. Their bond had grown stronger than words could convey. What had begun as a simple act of rescue had transformed into a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual reliance. He could feel the weight of her gaze, the silent insistence that he remain close, and it struck him deeply. She was not merely an Apache woman in need of help. She was a person with her own strength, intelligence, and spirit, and she had chosen to trust him completely. As they descended into the valley, the woman stayed close, mirroring his movements, anticipating obstacles and offering silent guidance. They moved with a rhythm that seemed almost natural, a dance of cooperation and understanding. Even when her legs trembled with fatigue, she refused to be left behind. James found himself thinking about the journey ahead, the challenges they would face, and the bond that had formed in these few days. It was rare to find such trust in the wild, and he knew that their partnership was something extraordinary, a connection forged in danger, survival, and shared courage. By nightfall, they found a secluded spot near the river, hidden by tall reeds and trees. James helped her settle, tending to her injuries once more. She sat quietly, watching him work, occasionally offering gestures to guide him or indicate discomfort. It was a silent communication, but it was perfect in its clarity. They shared a simple meal by the fire, their eyes meeting often, conveying thoughts and emotions without a single word. James realized that the journey had changed both of them. He was no longer just a traveler in the Wild West. He was a companion, a protector, and perhaps someone she could rely on as much as he relied on her. As the night settled over the valley, James kept watch while she slept. The fire crackled softly, and the river whispered nearby. He reflected on the day's events, the dangers they had faced, the lessons learned, and the unspoken bond that had grown stronger with each step. She had shown courage, intelligence, and determination beyond what he had expected, and in turn, he had protected her, guided her, and offered care. Together, they had faced danger, and together, they had survived. In the quiet of the night, James understood something important. The journey was not just about reaching her people or finding safety. It was about trust, partnership, and the remarkable connection that had formed between two lives thrown together in the wilderness. The Apache woman, with her courage and resilience, had not only survived, but had become an equal partner in this journey. And James, in turn, had found a companion, a guide, and a friend in the untamed Wild West, someone who would not let him walk away, someone whose trust and determination had become as vital to him as his own will to survive. The next morning, the sun rose over the valley in warm shades of gold, illuminating the path ahead. James stirred first, glancing at the Apache woman as she prepared herself for the journey. Despite the exhaustion of the past days and the lingering pain from her injuries, she moved with quiet determination. There was a strength in her posture, a confidence that came not only from surviving the wilderness, but from the trust and bond that had developed between them. James watched her for a moment, feeling a mixture of admiration, respect, and an unspoken connection that had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced together. They had traveled far, and now the distant site of her people's settlement could be seen nestled along the edge of the valley. Smoke rose gently from small fires, and the sound of voices drifted faintly through the trees. For the Apache woman, this was home, a place of safety, familiarity, and family. Yet she did not rush ahead. Instead, she lingered beside James, her eyes meeting his, as if silently asking him to stay. He understood immediately. The bond they had formed during their journey had changed both of them. What had begun as a simple act of rescue had grown into something deeper: trust, respect, and a connection neither could ignore. As they approached the settlement, the Apache woman's pace slowed slightly, and James offered his hand to support her. She accepted, not out of weakness, but as a sign of continued partnership. The villagers noticed them approaching and quickly recognized her. Relief and joy spread across their faces as they ran to greet her. She smiled softly, acknowledging their concern, yet her eyes constantly returned to James. It was clear that while she was home, part of her world had now been shared with him. James felt the weight of the moment. He had guided her to safety, but she had also shown him a world filled with courage, resilience, and quiet wisdom. Her family approached, and there was an exchange of gestures, hugs, and soft words in their language. James tried to communicate through nods and smiles, and they understood that he had been a protector, a guide, and a friend. They expressed gratitude in their own way, acknowledging the bravery and care he had shown during their journey. Yet the Apache woman's gaze never left James. She stepped forward, and in a gesture that needed no words, she indicated that she did not want him to leave. James felt a mix of surprise and admiration. The bond they had formed was unspoken but undeniable. She had trusted him with her life, shared her knowledge, and now, even in the safety of her home, she refused to let that connection end. James took a deep breath, realizing that he faced a choice. He had always been a wanderer, traveling alone across the vast plains of the Wild West, living day to day and moving from place to place. Yet in these past days, he had discovered something he had never experienced before: companionship, mutual trust, and a shared sense of purpose. The Apache woman had changed the rhythm of his life. She had shown him courage in the face of danger, resilience in the face of injury, and the value of unspoken communication and understanding. And now, as she silently asked him to stay, James understood that leaving her would mean walking away from something extraordinary. The villagers welcomed them, offering food, clean water, and shelter. The Apache woman moved among them, greeting friends and family, yet she remained close to James. It was as if she was quietly claiming him as part of her world, a recognition of the journey they had shared and the bond that had been forged through hardship and trust. James felt a sense of belonging he had never known. The wilderness had always been his home, but in her presence he discovered a new sense of purpose, one that went beyond survival, beyond wandering, beyond solitude. He was part of something larger, something meaningful. As the day went on, James observed the community. They were strong, resourceful, and deeply connected to the land. The Apache woman moved among them with confidence and grace, yet she constantly returned to his side, guiding him through the nuances of her world. James realized that their journey had changed both of them profoundly. She had survived countless challenges, but he had witnessed her strength firsthand, learning from her courage and resourcefulness. And she, in turn, had trusted him completely, allowing him to protect her, guide her, and share in her experiences. Their connection was no longer just about survival. It was about understanding, partnership, and mutual respect. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James and the Apache woman sat together outside the settlement. The sky was painted in shades of red and purple, and the air carried the scent of pine, earth, and distant fires. They sat quietly, side by side, neither speaking, yet both understanding the significance of the moment. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but it had brought them to this point, to a place of safety, understanding, and connection. James felt a deep sense of gratitude. The wilderness had tested him, challenged him, and shown him the value of trust and courage. And through it all, he had discovered a bond with someone extraordinary, a bond that could not be broken by distance, language, or circumstance. As night fell, the village settled into calm. Families gathered around fires, children played quietly, and the Apache woman's family prepared for the night. James and the woman remained outside, watching the stars appear one by one. She reached out, taking his hand gently, and he held it in return. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes: trust, companionship, and a shared understanding of the journey they had endured together. In the silence of the night, James realized that this moment marked a turning point. He had come into her life as a stranger, a rescuer, but he was leaving with something far more valuable: a friend, a partner, and someone who had shown him the meaning of courage, resilience, and connection. Over the following days, James settled into the settlement, helping where he could. He learned their ways, adapted to their routines, and shared stories of his travels across the plains. The Apache woman remained close, teaching him, guiding him, and showing him the intricacies of her world. Their bond deepened further, built not just on the trials of the journey, but on shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. They became inseparable, companions in every sense of the word. The villagers came to accept James, recognizing the bond between him and the woman, and the value of the partnership they had formed in the wilderness. Time passed, and the memory of their dangerous journey through the plains became a story often recounted around fires, a tale of survival, courage, and trust. James and the Apache woman, though from different worlds, had discovered that companionship and partnership could overcome even the harshest challenges. The bond they shared was more than friendship. It was a connection forged in adversity, strengthened by shared trials, and made unbreakable through trust and understanding. In the quiet moments of the night, as the village slept under the watchful stars, James reflected on how a single act of courage had transformed his life. Rescuing her from danger had led to something he could never have imagined: a partnership that would shape his days, teach him patience, empathy, and courage, and fill the void of solitude he had known for so long. The Apache woman had saved more than herself. She had saved him from a life of wandering without connection, showing him the value of trust, partnership, and mutual respect. As the fire burned low and the night grew deep, James and the woman sat side by side, watching the flames flicker and dance. They did not speak, for words were unnecessary. Every glance, every gesture, every shared silence communicated what they could not say aloud: that they were no longer alone, that they had found trust, courage, and companionship in each other, and that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The journey through the wilderness, the danger of bandits, the harshness of the land, all of it had led to this moment. And so, under the endless sky of the Wild West, James and the Apache woman remained together. The sun would rise again, bringing new days, new challenges, and new adventures. But they would face them side by side, bound not by words, but by trust, courage, and the unspoken bond of shared experience. Their journey had begun with a single act of rescue, but it ended with a connection that would endure far beyond the plains, a testament to the power of bravery, trust, and the human spirit in the untamed Wild West.